Welcome back to the channel. If you're into hidden Hollywood secrets, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear from you. They look like the perfect stars, handsome, charming, and straight. But behind the fame were secrets too dangerous to reveal. Some were exposed by tragedy. Others stayed hidden until the final breath. Today, we uncover the untold stories of 10 Golden Age actors who lived and loved in the shadows. What they left behind was more than a legacy. It was a warning about what fame can cost when truth is forbidden. At the height of Hollywood's golden era, no leading man shone brighter than Rock Hudson. With his towering frame, chiseled jawline, and effortless charm, Hudson embodied the ideal American male on screen. Rugged, romantic, and irresistibly suave. Films like Pillow Talk and Giant turned him into a global sensation, the kind of star whose name alone filled theaters. But behind the carefully manufactured image was a man living a very different reality. One filled with secrets, sacrifices, and the quiet ache of hiding who he truly was. In an industry that demanded illusion, Rock became its most convincing magician. For decades, Hudson played the role expected of him, both on and off camera. Studio contracts and publicists worked overtime to maintain the illusion of heterosexuality, often linking him to female stars and staged romances. But within private circles, Rock was known to live as a gay man, one forced into silence by a world unwilling to accept him. He found companionship in the shadows, love behind closed doors, and identity only in the quiet moments he could claim as his own. The loneliness was palpable, yet he endured it all with quiet strength, choosing his career over truth and fame over freedom for a time. In 1985, everything changed. Diagnosed with AIDS at a time when the disease was still shrouded in fear and stigma, Hudson made a courageous decision. He came out publicly as gay just months before his passing. It was a revelation that rocked the world. The heartthrob of a generation was now the face of a crisis the world barely understood. His honesty in his final days broke the silence that had once defined his life, bringing unprecedented attention to the AIDS epidemic and the human cost of secrecy. Rock Hudson didn't just leave behind a legacy of cinematic greatness, he became a symbol of truth, a reminder that no lie lasts forever, and that even in a town built on make-believe, authenticity has the power to change everything. Montgomery Clift was the kind of actor who burned through the screen with an intensity that few could match. With smoldering eyes and a voice that trembled with quiet vulnerability, he carved a new kind of leading man. One who was deeply human, fragile, and utterly captivating. From A Place in the Sun to From Here to Eternity, Clift redefined masculinity in post-war America, bringing emotional truth to roles that had once been built on bravado. But his brilliance came at a cost. Behind the camera, he was plagued by insecurity, addiction, and the constant pressure to maintain a facade that did not reflect who he truly was. Hollywood celebrated his performances, but it never gave him the freedom to live openly. Though never publicly out, those closest to Clift knew the truth about his sexuality. He loved men in an era that demanded silence, and so he lived in the shadows of his own fame. He had relationships, intense, complicated, and deeply private. But the fear of exposure haunted him. This inner conflict bled into his performances, making them richer, more heartbreaking, and utterly unforgettable. He became known as one of the original method actors, yet few understood that his greatest performance may have been the one he gave off-screen, playing the role of a straight, tortured heartthrob to a world that never questioned the illusion. His pain was never just acting, it was real and it was relentless. By the time Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack in 1966, he was only 45, but he had lived lifetimes in those few decades. His face, once so radiant, had been weathered by years of emotional and physical torment. Yet in death, he became more than just a tragic figure. He became a symbol of how brilliance and suffering can be intertwined. Today, we remember Clift not only for his haunting performances, but for the quiet defiance with which he lived. In a time when authenticity could ruin careers, he chose survival. And though the world never gave him the space to love out loud, his legacy speaks volumes about the courage it took to exist at all. In the golden glow of 1950s Hollywood, Sal Mineo emerged as a magnetic force. a youthful, rebellious spirit who electrified the screen in Rebel Without a Cause alongside James Dean. With his piercing eyes and raw vulnerability, Mineo captured the imagination of a generation, becoming the poster boy for misunderstood teens. He was more than just a heartthrob, he was an actor with range, nominated twice for an Academy Award before the age of 21. But beyond the spotlight, Mineo was navigating a far more complex personal truth, one that the era's rigid expectations forced him to keep hidden. He walked a tightrope between fame and fear, adored by millions but unable to live openly in a world that demanded conformity. As his career evolved, Sal Mineo pushed beyond the roles that had made him famous. He ventured into theater, directing, and took on grittier, more nuanced parts that defied his earlier image. Yet the industry was unkind to those who didn't fit the mold, and whispers about his sexuality, though never publicly confirmed, began to cast a shadow over his opportunities. Friends and colleagues would later recall his deep emotional struggles, his longing for love and authenticity in a time that punished both. Though he never came out officially, Mineo's circle knew who he was and loved him for it. He was a trailblazer in silence, daring to be himself in private, even when the cost was steep in public. Sadly, Sal Mineo's journey was brought to an abrupt end in 1976 when he lost his life during an incident described as a robbery near his Los Angeles apartment. He was only 37. The suddenness of his departure sent ripples through Hollywood and left a deep sense of loss among those who understood his quiet strength. In the years that followed, stories emerged of a man who had lived with honesty behind the scenes, someone who loved deeply, created passionately, and longed to be free. Though he was never granted the chance to live his truth openly, Sal Mineo's legacy shines on. He remains a haunting symbol of the beauty that blooms in silence, and of the many voices that history once tried to hush. In the golden haze of Hollywood's most glamorous era, Anthony Perkins emerged not just as an actor, but as a symbol of haunted beauty. With piercing eyes and a vulnerability that shimmered beneath the surface, Perkins captivated audiences in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, redefining what it meant to play the troubled outsider. But off-screen, the man behind Norman Bates lived a far more complex and secretive life, one shaped by fear, longing, and a world that never gave him permission to be fully himself. Despite his fame, Perkins kept much of his personal life shrouded, rarely offering more than what the spotlight demanded. Behind closed doors, Anthony Perkins was a man torn between the expectations of an unforgiving industry and the quiet truth of his identity. While his performances often reflected deep emotional layers, his real life mirrored those same themes: internal conflict, coded messages, and silent suffering. In public, he married photographer Barry Berenson and became a father, crafting a conventional family image that kept rumors at bay. But in the private corners of his world, close friends and confidants would later reveal a different story. A story of a man who loved men, but never found a space where that truth could live freely. The burden of secrecy, like a role he could never shed, followed him through the decades. In 1992, at just 60 years old, Anthony Perkins quietly slipped away due to complications from AIDS-related pneumonia. His passing marked the end of a brilliant, yet painfully guarded life. In one of his final statements, Perkins spoke not of regret, but of hope. Hope that future generations would live more openly, love more freely, and be spared the silence that had shadowed his own journey. Today we remember him not just for his iconic roles, but for the silent courage he carried, the dual lives he juggled, and the way he still haunts Hollywood. Not as Norman Bates, but as a man who yearned for authenticity in a world that would not allow it. Few figures in entertainment history have ever embodied spectacle the way Liberace did. With his lavish costumes, jewel-encrusted pianos, and over-the-top charisma, he transformed classical piano into theatrical magic. Born Wadzio Valentino Liberace, he captivated audiences with a blend of musical genius and Vegas-style flair, turning his performances into dazzling events where elegance and excess met on the same stage. From televised concerts to sold-out residencies, his style was unmistakable. Glittering capes, fur-lined robes, and a smile that seemed to promise endless enchantment. In the mid-20th century, when American living rooms needed fantasy, Liberace delivered it, wrapped in rhinestones and sealed with charm. Yet for all the sparkle, his personal truth was kept under lock and key. In a time when society was unforgiving of LGBTQ+ identities, Liberace carefully maintained a public image that denied the rumors swirling around his sexuality. He took legal action against tabloids that dared to question him, winning lawsuits while keeping up appearances as a charismatic bachelor. Despite long-time relationships behind the scenes, including a well-known but unspoken romance with his live-in companion, he chose silence over self-revelation. The world applauded his theatrics, but behind closed doors, he was navigating the complexities of living a double life, a life where love was private and masks were mandatory. Liberace passed in 1987 from complications related to AIDS, and only then did whispers become history. His final chapter revealed the weight of a life lived behind curtains, not just the stage kind, but emotional ones too. Though he never publicly embraced his truth, his impact on culture remains undeniable. He opened doors, even if he never walked through them himself. Today, his legacy is twofold: a reminder of extraordinary talent and an enduring symbol of how fame, when bound by fear, can both elevate and isolate. In the end, Liberace didn't just play piano. He played a role for the world, and perhaps, deep down, he hoped the music would say what he never could. Paul Winfield was a commanding presence in every room he entered, on screen or off. With a deep voice and thoughtful gaze, he brought layered intensity to his roles. Whether portraying Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in King or earning an Academy Award nomination for his heartbreaking performance in Sounder. What set him apart wasn't just talent, it was dignity. Winfield navigated Hollywood with grace, carving a place for himself at a time when opportunities for black actors were few and far between. He didn't play caricatures. He brought complexity, restraint, and humanity to every character, reminding audiences that black stories deserve depth. In an industry obsessed with typecasting, Paul stood tall, unapologetic, precise, and powerful. But beyond the camera lights, Winfield lived a quieter kind of courage. He was a proud gay man in a time when being out could cost you everything. Unlike many of his peers, he did not cloak his truth behind sham marriages or studio-crafted lies. For over 2 decades, Paul shared his life with Charles Gillen Jr., a relationship grounded in love and mutual respect. They lived openly, a bold act in a world still hesitant to celebrate same-sex love, especially between 2 men of color. Their partnership stood as a testament to what love looks like when allowed to flourish in the shadows and the light. It was not loud, not political, but it was brave, and it mattered. In 2004, Paul Winfield passed away from a heart attack brought on by diabetes complications. Hollywood lost one of its finest, but the world lost something greater. A man who lived with truth and led by example. He did not chase fame or controversy, he chased excellence. And in doing so, he redefined what it meant to be a leading man, not just for black actors, not just for gay men, but for anyone ever told their story did not matter. Today, his legacy echoes in the performances of those who follow, in every role played with integrity and in every actor who dares to live openly. Paul Winfield was more than a performer, he was a pioneer. Ian Charleson was not only a gifted actor, but also a man of immense quiet strength, whose legacy still echoes through the walls of British theatre and film. Born with a natural elegance and a striking stage presence, Charleson captivated audiences with his portrayal of Eric Liddell in Chariots of Fire, a performance that earned global praise for its spiritual depth and subtle power. But long before Hollywood took notice, he had already proven himself a force on the London stage, bringing Shakespeare's most complex characters to life with grace and fire. Whether in the Royal Shakespeare Company or at the National Theatre, his performances carried a rare sincerity that made even the most stoic characters feel heartbreakingly human. Behind the curtain, though, Ian was waging a personal battle he chose to fight in silence. Diagnosed with HIV in the 1980s, he continued to perform with unshakable professionalism, even as his health declined. His decision to keep working, especially in physically demanding roles like Hamlet, was not only brave, it was revolutionary. At a time when stigma surrounding AIDS was at its height, Charleson challenged public perception not with words, but with action. He performed his final Hamlet in 1989, visibly frail but spiritually defiant, a performance that left the theater world in awe. It was a farewell not just to a role, but to a life devoted to truth in art. Ian Charleson passed away in 1990 from pneumonia related to AIDS just weeks after his 40th birthday. But before he left, he made one final, groundbreaking decision. He asked that the cause of his passing be made public. In doing so, he became one of the first well-known actors in the United Kingdom to openly connect his name to AIDS, shattering silence with dignity. That courageous act turned his death into a statement of visibility and hope for countless others living in fear. More than 3 decades later, Charleson's legacy endures not just in the roles he played, but in the quiet bravery he showed in the face of an unforgiving illness, and in the truth he left behind. To millions of American households, Robert Reed was the quintessential father figure, wise, calm, and always ready with a warm smile. As Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, Reed became an enduring symbol of the idealized suburban dad, guiding his on-screen family with steady love and logic. Yet behind that wholesome image was a man navigating a far more complicated reality. Off-screen, Reed was a classically trained actor who often felt constrained by the lightweight sitcom that brought him fame. He longed for more serious, meaningful roles, ones that would showcase the depth of his craft. But even more pressing was the emotional burden he carried in silence. He was a gay man living in an industry and a society that would not allow him to live authentically. Reed's struggle with identity was not just professional, it was deeply personal. In a time when being openly gay could end a career overnight, he made the painful choice to keep his truth hidden. Colleagues later recalled a man who was both warm and guarded, generous yet intensely private. Though he formed close friendships, he never spoke publicly about his sexuality. His decision to remain silent was not about shame, but about survival. The painful calculation so many in his era were forced to make. Reed poured himself into his work and into mentoring younger actors, perhaps offering them the openness and support he never had. The contradiction of being America's TV dad while living a life of secrecy was a quiet ache that defined much of his adult life. In 1992, Robert Reed passed away from colon cancer, with complications stemming from HIV, a diagnosis few knew he carried. It wasn't until after his death that the truth about his sexuality emerged, sparking conversations that his era had long suppressed. What he kept private in life became part of a broader reckoning in death. Reed's story is one of quiet courage, a reminder that not all heroes come out in headlines. Some lived their truth quietly in the margins, under the weight of a world not ready to embrace them. And even in silence, they paved the way for the generations who would one day speak freely. Tommy Kirk rose to fame as one of Disney's golden boys, charming, clean-cut, and endlessly likable. With unforgettable roles in classics like Old Yeller, The Shaggy Dog, and Swiss Family Robinson, he quickly became a household name in the 1950s and early 1960s. Audiences adored his wholesome image, and the studio had big plans for him as one of their rising stars. But behind the bright smile and all-American persona was a young man struggling with a truth he was forced to hide. As his star was climbing, Tommy was grappling with his identity in silence, a reality that would ultimately cost him everything he had built. In the early 1960s, when Disney discovered that Tommy was gay, they swiftly severed ties with him. There was no discussion, no defense, just rejection. For a young man whose career had been so carefully shaped by the studio system, the blow was devastating. Hollywood was not kind to openly gay actors, especially not during its most conservative era. The doors that once opened so easily for him were now closed. But Tommy, despite the pain, chose to live in truth. He walked away from the spotlight and began a quieter life, far from the cameras and scripts, rebuilding on his own terms. He never denied who he was, and in that quiet defiance, he became more than a child star. He became a quiet pioneer. When Tommy Kirk passed away in 2021 of natural causes, it was not with the fanfare Hollywood once gave him, but with the dignity of someone who had lived on his own terms. In his later years, he spoke openly about his sexuality and the struggles he had endured, not out of bitterness, but with a sense of peace. He may have been cast aside by the system, but he never allowed it to define him. His life reminds us that authenticity, even in the face of rejection, is its own kind of victory. Tommy's legacy is not just one of cinematic nostalgia. It is a story of quiet bravery, resilience, and the courage to be true when the world said you could not. Michael Jeter was never your typical Hollywood leading man, but that is exactly what made him unforgettable. With a wiry frame, expressive face, and a voice that could shift from fragile vulnerability to boundless joy, Jeter carved out a niche unlike anyone else in film and television. He brought to life quirky, complex characters that stayed with audiences long after the credits rolled. From the tender-hearted Edouard Delacroix in The Green Mile to the lovable Mr. Noodle's brother in Sesame Street, Jeter proved that charm, heart, and authenticity were more powerful than conventional stardom. In a world that often rewards typecasting, he shattered the mold and made it look effortless. Behind the scenes, Michael Jeter was just as fearless. At a time when being openly gay in Hollywood could be a career-ending move, he made a different choice: to live authentically. He came out publicly and stood by his longtime partner, Sean Blue, with grace and pride. It was not an announcement for headlines. It was a quiet act of courage. Jeter believed that his work should speak for itself, and it did, winning him an Emmy Award and a Tony Award along the way. He never let his identity limit him, and in doing so, he gave visibility and hope to others who felt unseen in the spotlight's harsh glare. In 2003, Michael Jeter passed away due to complications related to epilepsy, leaving behind a legacy far greater than the roles he played. He showed the world that true artistry lies in embracing who you are, not who others expect you to be. His performances were a gift, but his life was a lesson in resilience, love, and quiet bravery. For those who saw themselves in his characters or found courage in his truth, Jeter's story remains a powerful reminder. Sometimes, the brightest lights in Hollywood are not the biggest, but the most honest. And in that honesty, Michael Jeter continues to shine. Their stories remind us that fame often came with a hidden price, and for some, the cost was their very identity. In a world that demanded silence, they carried their truth alone. If their journeys moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And this is only the beginning. In the next episode, we'll reveal even more secrets. Names you know, faces you loved, and truths Hollywood never wanted you to hear. Stay tuned.